Okay. I'd like to call Monday, November 4th, 2024, City Council Work Session order at 6 p.m. We're again reviewing of city committees. City Manager Ben Bergner take a lead on this.
Awesome. The consolidated responses.
They're two F.
Had everywhere else, right?
Yeah,
they missed it up there. Must have been
Yeah, the other are good.
there. How did that get through? Blame.
Something I call that one.
Let the record note we need to adjust those first two.
Change it, Susan.
1S. Huh, it's done on my paper. I don't know what you're looking at. Right. All right. Thank you, Council, for responding to these council goals. Committee workshop talking about committees. We had sent out a questionnaire of 11 different questions, kind of following up from our last committee discussion, going over just further high level overview of committees. Last time we talked about the value of committees, and then this time we have a little bit more information, got the responses. There's a lot here. I was not able to get it to you beforehand, so we're just going to talk about each of these questions, and you have the consolidated answers from everybody on here. The goal of all of these discussions, we'll probably have a few more in the future, whether they're after January's goals session or sooner, is really just to kind of get that feel from the council, kind of get more of a consolidated or a unified approach to our committees. One thing I noticed as we started talking about committees was there's a lot of different opinions of why we have committees, what committees we have, what committees we need, and what we should do with them. And that all spurred from the original discussion of, how do we operate our committees and help them be more successful, and for us to best work with them as well. So the very first question that we sent out was just what type of committees needed. Now, I had asked the council, one of the most difficult things about reviewing what we currently have, there is a tendency, just a human tendency, that you don't want to get rid of what you already have. And that's not the intent, is to recommend getting rid of anything, but to try to take a step back and say, if this were today, we had no committees whatsoever, and we're looking at this to recommend a committee, would we still go with what we have right now? Would we have recommended that today, knowing that the Parks Master Plan is already done, knowing that other things have already been accomplished? Is this still something we would have gone through, and why? And that was the whole question, is let's take this as though we have nothing, let's look high level, and this wasn't just about our two committees, there were additional committees that were recommended on top of that, which was the whole point of this, is what type of committees do we need, and why? So we got some really good responses. Just going over them real quick. Tyler, in summary, basically said that committees are of most value just when we're doing a Parks Master Plan update, or a Parks Master Plan, and then every year thereafter to update our master plan, ideally meeting in October, just to see if there's any updates that are needed. Andrew's response there is there in B, talking about ad hoc models making most sense in general, but there are benefits for different types of committees, and mentioning how we could maybe use those. Kim, Joe, Marissa, and Jeanette all called out economic development as one that is needed. Parks and Recreation specifically called out Kim, Joe, Marissa, and Jeanette. And then 2 or 3 new committees recommended as something to look forward in now or in the future. Potentially emergency preparedness. Kim specifically had mentioned about doing like a CERT, which is a community emergency response team. And then Joe had gone to an LAPC meeting, which is the local emergency preparedness committee. If I got that right, correct if I'm wrong, it's something like that. As potential things that we could look at for being more prepared in our community, both of those recommended maybe as potential in the future to look at. Marissa had mentioned safety committee, and Jeanette had also mentioned a potential of a community club partnership to working with them. So these were just off the cuff, based off our goals. We have those posted on the wall there. What the council has been working on, what the staff has been working on. These were the initial thought from the council of the types of committees we needed. Anything that anybody would like to add since you've sent this in as potentially new thoughts for committees?
One on mine was the LEPC. I find that the county does have that, and we are probably a member. So I just need to verify if we have a liaison or a rep from our staff that goes. It's countywide, but it's something we could look at ourselves to make sure we're covered, but it's a county committee.
Awesome. Welcome, Tyler. Forgot to email you, Tyler, the summary of this. I'll get this after the meeting to you. So you have a copy of the document we're looking at. That's the summation of everybody's responses, but we're kind of going over them anyways. And then we've got Mike also who joined. Okay, welcome.
I asked Councilor Jacobs to elaborate on the safety committee because I'm wondering if there's some overlap with the preparedness.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of like how you, I've heard a lot about how kids get to school, like sidewalks, and I think some form of this committee or traffic safety committee or something is existing, but like, does it make sense to block off certain areas of a street, to paint the curb like you can't park there? How to prioritize like sidewalks getting created and filled in. So more, I was thinking like safety of how you navigate the community.
Okay.
Not so much about like, hey, let's talk about that thing that happened the other night when the cop showed up. That thing.
So that does make me wonder then, where does the traffic safety committee fall within this? Because that's more of a staff committee.
Yeah.
That's a good idea to look at that, because that is a staff committee. How does that staff committee work? What are the runs that? Who calls that? We have a representative, a liaison from our council that goes to that.
Yeah, typically run by the staff coming up with the agendas and anything that's given to them as part of the way we do our operations. And so number 2 is the question of why. And so it does go into that on these committees of why these were recommended. And as Marissa or Councilor Jacobs had already, Marissa with 1S had mentioned, see it's there with 1S there. Yeah, she was more talking about kind of like the safety committee we have as a staff committee, and would that need to be into a council committee or stay where it's at and give reports to the council about that? That'd be something we could definitely discuss and look into. The economic development, it was viewed that Kim, well, I don't want to just go through everybody's comments. You can kind of look through those, but in general, we're working on our downtown business. We want to support our leisure. We want to get a downtown created, improve our land zones around that, help really spur our economic development in general. I do feel as our goal 1, develop a vibrant, diverse local economy, really translated well to that economic development. The why behind there may be additionally just because we're able to bring in additional professionals that we may not have, business owners, developers that have experience in this area, and then could help give some advisory role to the council and the staff of how we can better improve our downtown and other economic development. Parks and Recreation, this one has been an interesting discussion. I've talked with people individually. I've talked with committee members. I've talked with staff. There's obviously we have the goals: enhance community livability, goal 2, and goal 4, having a diverse park system. The application of this committee seems to be a little bit different depending on who comes about this. And this is one of those things that we would want to potentially look further into about whether it be a staff committee, reforming that type of committee, better using our committee, prioritizing things. It's really just coming up with what we're going to do with that committee now that the Parks Master Plan is done. There are a lot of different ways to go about that, as mentioned in here. So any other things about the Parks and Recreation Committee you want to add, or just based off these comments that you think would be good for Parks and Rec? Once again, this is why should we do it today? Not why have we had it? Why do we need this? Is there staff that we have insufficiency? Do we not have the professionalism or the expertise behind this? Or is it just a matter of, do we need to look at it differently? Is parks the right focus, or should we focus more on recreation events? I mean, there's different ways to go about that. Any comments on that above and beyond this?
Yeah, I do. Going on that, I'd like to maybe either add recreation as a committee or in lieu of that, or to focus more on that, because there are, as we've done the parks and we have the master plan, we've done some prioritization, there is a lot of recreation things that we could be doing, whether it's done with that group or a whole nother group. I think recreation needs to be looked at more specifically.
Absolutely. One comment I actually received from a council chair in the Economic Development Committee, and I think it's applicable to all committees. One thing to consider as we're looking at these different committees as well, just as a side comment with this, when we're looking at a council committee, one of the constraints that committee members have mentioned is the fact that those are bound by public meeting laws. And they kind of feel that they're coming in as advisory, and it's harder to be action oriented because it's harder to meet outside of that because there's risk of violating public meeting laws. And so there was some discussion even from committee members, hey, we want to get stuff done, but it seems so difficult having to follow these procedures the way we have it right now. And that would be some of those advantages of, in some cases, having a staff committee, or as Jeanette had mentioned about the community club partnership, there's external clubs that we can go to. So some of those discussions we had even with the Economic Development Committee is, right now, obviously it covers the urban renewal, and then they're working on the strategic plan. But going down the road, what does that look like for them? Is that going to be a permanent committee still, or does it translate into working towards like a Main Street program, and then it breaks off so that they can work independently, but with the city, so they don't have to, then, because a Main Street program is usually like a nonprofit organization that co-ops with the city. They have to follow our guidelines. They come with their own grants and they operate themselves, but obviously they're stuck with our code still too. And they try to really help recruit people downtown, help create a downtown atmosphere. It's almost like a chamber of commerce, but just for your downtown. It's kind of almost on steroids because it's just focused on that. And there's different grant programs out there just for those. So that would be something to look at as well. And that's why I'm looking at these. All these committees, is it always just the council committee that we want? Because there is the community, there's community groups, there's the staff, and they can still accomplish the things we're looking for. And we'll talk more about that as we go through these, because that was some of the comments that I was given. Great comments, and they're valid, all of them. But then there's the other question on the other side of, okay, it's great, but is there another way? And is the other way more effective? Is this the right way to do things? This is a way of doing things, but is it the best way that we want to go forward? So, emergency preparedness, we already talked about CERT and safety, because really emphasizing the safety areas, street safety. Community club partnership, leveraging existing organization, more flexible. And so Jeanette mentioned that, kind of using the community. It provides a different avenue to go by. That's a little more flexible for people to succeed in. And that's really the goal, right? We had mentioned in these values, we want committee members, we want community engagement, number one. We want more opinions. We want people to be engaged with the council, with the staff, with the city. But getting that is kind of what is the best way to go about doing those type of things, as well as keeping them engaged, helping them be successful. And that's why we're kind of looking through this of how we can best structure with the resources that we have. All right. Anything else to add about the why? Questions on that? All right. A lot of these, the 3 is a little quicker, so we can run through that one quick. Most of them now in economic development, parks and recreation now. Marissa had mentioned ad hoc for that one. Place on hold until after goal setting. Is that referencing not changing until after goal setting, or reassessing at that time?
I think it's more of like once we get through these next couple months, especially after goal setting, is like establishing what that committee looks like. Because right now, when I'm thinking of the next 2 months, I'm like on the agenda,
Right.
and like there's nothing.
Right, and that is, Joe and I had talked about this, or Mayor Backus, obviously right now is probably not the best time to pull the trigger on anything. This is really, let's get a lot of this thought process going. Let's look into this so that we can start thinking as we go through our goal setting, as we go through that process, and then thereafter, then we kind of look at making some changes so they can still be part of the process that we have, and see where it goes from there.
I would really look at the purpose, in their bylaws. The purpose of the Parks and Rec was to advise and make recommendation to the city council on park and recreation policies and issues, and support community and city council efforts to maintain, develop, and promote parks and recreation opportunities. And see if that's what we need, or do we need to tweak that, or do we need to, like I had mentioned, recreation more so, but do we need them to look at policies now that our Parks and Master Plan is done? Maybe there's other purpose that we need to identify, and then come up with different responsibilities and objectives once we do. But I do like that. I don't want to just get rid of it right before goal setting, but I also don't want to make a bunch of changes to it on the opposite way either. Maybe we can go through goal setting with an approach of, hey, we have this committee potential going through goal setting, and we use them while we're setting goals, and kind of like take some time to really look at this and figure out the best way to use that committee.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, we have an open position in City Hall too, and the staff's asked, well, what are we doing with that position? Similar, I've put it on positive because I really want to know where the council's goals are. They're going to change potentially or updated. And if recreation becomes more of a priority or something else, I want to make sure that we can maybe utilize a staff position to help with that. In addition, it would be half of it. That other half would still be administrative, more than likely, but maybe not. It just depends on where we go with that. And so yeah, I think now is just a really good time to start strategizing about where we want to go with this, so we can come back with the new year with where we want to go. Marissa had mentioned with the safety committee to start that or look at in the new year as well. Emergency preparedness, Kim, in the future, once we can figure out the alignment. All right. 4, the type of committee should they have? There's just a variety. I'm not going to go through these individually because I think any of them could work in any fashion. It just depends on eventually how we have that structure and what we really want those committees to tackle. Obviously, the action committees are sometimes a little easier on the staff side because they can get out there, they can meet as much as they need to, they can talk as much as they need to. There's no public meeting things, but there's less transparency if we're wanting that decision making as a public process. Then the council would be more appropriate for something like that. Or if it's just, hey, we want somebody. There's some really good groups out there that I've heard in this area, which is fantastic. There's a soccer club that's doing their own soccer thing. There's baseball. We already have groups that are not part of the city accomplishing some amazing things. Can we spur some more of those for recreation or parks or any of these other committees as well? So no definitive answer, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And the whole point is to look at these and just challenge if there's a way to do those differently. And if that's the way we want to go.
One thing I looked at too is, like, to me, looking at ad hoc, how long does it take? A lot of time to put together an ad hoc. Like if you have maybe 4 things a year, you think, oh yeah, we could use some help. But are you putting 4 different ad hocs together, and how long does that take to set up? Or if you had that standing committee, and you just went to them 4 times a year. Okay, here's our next project. Here's what we have coming up for you. They work on it and then they're done, and then they don't meet for a little while until we need them again.
Right.
I'm not sure what it takes to set up an ad hoc each time.
And it depends on, do you have the people that you already have there that can get on there really quick, or do you have to go out and recruit new committee members? Do they have the expertise? It's one thing to have a permanent committee, but then if you change their roles and there's nobody on there who knows how to do it, for example, just parks, we've talked about recreation and events. If they're really focused on park structure and design, and then we're going, let's really focus on recreation, getting events and getting out there and getting donations. And the committee members are like, that's not me. Do we have the right people on there? Or are they going to feel like they're failing because we've just kind of thrown the rug out pulled the rug from underneath them for something that they weren't expecting to do? So in those situations, maybe a separate ad hoc committee or a community committee or staff committee could be there, whereas the permanent committee would be in that same general expertise. And it just depends on who you have on the committee. You might have a good variety that you could bring that all there.
Look at an example real quick of a model that we're talking about. So let's say Parks and Rec went to a staff committee. And then there's a project coming up or a council goal that we want to bring community members in. So we say, let's do an ad hoc. Does that have to be formally approved by council, or staff can?
Right, a staff committee is usually at the pleasure of the city manager. That I have identified a need for that committee. We're trying to get additional feedback from them, whether it's because there's expertise or we want additional. You know, for example, when I did in my prior in Stanfield, we did the disc golf course using our current park. Now I play disc golf. I'm not a professional by any means, but I know the basics. I can look up the rules, and I came up with a general design. And I've played enough in bad parks to understand that we want a good, well-maintained one, and we want some challenge as well. So that was a start, but I said, you know, we really should get some additional feedback from people who play the game. Just some really people are doing it all the time. And so I went out there and we gathered, and my staff gathered some people that play that game, and we pulled them together and say, hey, here's a start, tear this apart, let's see what we can do. We want to make this so it's something you want to play in. And it was very focused on people who use that type of thing. So if you're looking at our parks, the local community, you could do a neighborhood meeting, or you could do a general area where it's just focused, let's get feedback. And it could be in that meeting, you could do it through surveys. There's a lot of different ways. And that's one of the things is we talk about committees bringing additional community feedback. Really, you're only 7, 10, whatever. And how active are they at getting additional feedback? Or are they just using their own minds? And then are you making that decision based off of 10 people or potentially 50 people that their reach is, compared to if we're able to really do it out, staff going out and doing a survey, community meetings, throwing it out on the same Facebook page that anybody can do, and we get hundreds of responses, and then we're getting closer to like a 5 to 10% response from our community, or more localized, depending what we want. Is that a better way to get the feedback to make it a bigger impact? And those are questions that both are good. Depends on every project, depends on the type of outreach or response you want. Sometimes that's too much. It's just, let's stick with getting a smaller group. We have to make something happen.
Okay, I'm just thinking of efficiency. If ad hocs can be created pretty efficiently by staff and not approval going back and forth with council, I'm just getting a sense of.
Right, an ad hoc council would be, so if it's a council generated ad hoc committee, that would be more like an example of the Parks Master Plan.
Okay, right.
Where it's just, hey, we have one project, it's going to take probably a year or two. We need several meetings. We want public outreach. We want public meetings. We don't have time to do it as the council. We need some additional feedback or professionals, technical advisory. Let's put this together as a short term. It's a resolution, put it together, and it has a beginning and an end. Once it's done, they're done. And then we wait until there's a new project or an update.
I would look in, we did Grabhorn ad hoc to really define it, develop some ideas. And I'm not sure if that was through Parks and Rec or if that was through council.
Yeah, it was through Parks and Rec, but that was the way that we could engage a broader range of community members, and those that specifically represented kind of different communities, whether it be softball or soccer, and brought them on. And it worked
Council
well.
could do that. They could go out with an ad hoc on their own and maybe get the staff person to head it, or you to head up and find us a ad hoc for this.
Right, there are different ways, and that's part of the strategies. How do we recruit those? Sometimes it's just knowing the people, and you start building that through word of mouth. Sometimes with the council committees, I think it's more common to see that people apply for those, and it's reviewed as a, hey, I'm submitting almost like a job. Like, here's my expertise. Here's how I am impactful to the community for this particular committee. And I believe our charter, it's appointed by the mayor, so it may be also consulted with the council, but it's usually more of that. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, technically, you could go out there and like, I assign you, and we're going to make this happen if you guys are good with that. Obviously, if they're wanting to participate. So, I mean, those are things we can look at and different ways to go about doing that as well. We want to stick with, however, if it is laid out somewhere, and then also think if we want to adjust that at all. But there are different ways of going about that. Okay, any other comments on types of committees in general?
In talking with folks, did anyone raise the Friends of Scappoose Park? There used to be a nonprofit.
Right. Staff actually brought that up and because so community groups are great. If you get somebody who's really engaged and they want to do that, it's great as long as they're around. The problem with community groups, if that person or group of people move, pass away, whatever there may be, they move on somehow, then usually that committee or that group dissolves. And then you lose a lot of that, that good knowledge and history, and you almost have to start all over, which is hard to do. So it's really good if there's a plan for moving on from those and they can pass it on to somebody. It's fantastic. Sometimes a good way to do that is to make sure it is looped in with the city so that the city still maintains all that stuff. If they're working with the city already, so that if they dissolve that, whatever, we can then start it up again with the same information. The way I talked about that a lot of cities happen, that's usually more housed in, you have like an actual recreation department, a recreation coordinator, a staff member that's kind of coordinating that so that you can maintain consistency through different people that go on. As those groups either dissolve or move on, they still have all that they were working on. They already have all the contacts, and they can either move it in-house or create a new committee out there.
That has a question, statement.
Yeah, Jeanette.
Good evening, all. Sorry I can't be there in person or on camera, but I'm sick. But I'm listening in all this great information. My thing is, Ben, question. We're talking. I would love to see efficiency, structure, but at the same time, well, efficiency, and then it to be structured. Because you and I have had a conversation that it can be efficient, a committee, group, whatever you want to call it, but there needs to be structure in the sense of how things, how a committee or group can't just go crazy or within each other, respect, and all that conversation that you and I had. So, can you speak to that, please?
Right. So with the council committee, outside, if it's a group community committee, that's a little harder to regulate because it's their own group and they run it their own way. But in the staff or in the council, really having those rules of procedure help, not just how you run through the meeting to make sure people aren't speaking over each other or starting to call out names or other thing like that. There should, and we saw that in the city of Florence, there's definitely a section of removing committee members if they step out of line. And it should be the same thing as staff or in a council committee, where we want to hold them with the same respect as we would our staff or with you guys. It doesn't help for people to get charged and start going off the rails, as you had mentioned. You definitely want to have a good, and so having that operating procedure in place and holding to it, even if you lose people that you want on there, in the end, hopefully you can fix the problem and not go that route. But it's important to have that because it upholds the integrity of the committee, so all voices can be heard. That is a challenge in any volunteer committee, appointed committee, staff committee. If there's just one strong voice or two strong voices, you can lose a lot of efficiency, or if you can be efficient, but you lose the success of the committee as a whole, and then people become disenchanted, disenfranchised with that, and maybe don't want to continue with that, or feel like their voice isn't being heard. What's the point of me being there? So it is important to work as best we can to structure those to help people all be able to contribute. Does that answer that, Jeanette?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. All right, and so 5, we go over same thing, action committees, advisory. There's different ways to set those up, as we had seen, and you can see in the responses on there, there was a good variety. A lot of them, I think, want action in general. When I got the response from the council is, if we have a committee, it'd be nice for them to be able to have action as opposed to just advise the council. And is that correct? Is anybody more of no committees are more just want their advice to give back to us so you can take actions, or the staff can take action? And these responses are more indicated or look like, in general, it'd be nice if the committees take more action, are able to get out and do stuff beyond just the regular meetings. Fair to say. Okay, cool. Number 6 goes into just different tasks. There's a lot of different ideas on there. And at the end of this, so Joe and Jeanette threw in a different format for me on some of these things. So I put some things in there. I tried to get their comments in as best I could, but the ones that I didn't have time for, I didn't see, I just threw it at the end. Joe had put in a lot of things he had looked up online, some different values of the parks and economic development committees. So that is found at the end. So Joe, I didn't leave you off of there. It's just your answers are a lot longer than. Right. Yeah. Oh, it's okay. ChatGPT, not Google. Yeah.
Not at LOC, I had to use it. No, but my thought was, okay, they came up with about 8 things in there, and then we go through and say, yeah, that one works for us. No, that one doesn't work. Are there any, and we can change it, but are there any parts of those that, yeah, that's something I could see we could use some help on. We don't need to maybe help with the budget of the parks or park facilities, but maybe it's recreational program design and implement. I mean, you don't have to take them all on, but maybe there's a few in there that we deem is that we could use, whether it's ad hoc, staff committee, or a permanent committee.
Awesome. Yeah, if you ever are interested, we could do a meeting about ChatGPT and some of the great things about it and some of the pitfalls as well. There's good technology on there, but there's also warnings. Yeah, no, good advice and good recommendations from that. The number 6, I actually think provides a really good base for future conversation. As far as what do we want these committees to do? And we've heard a lot. What's the direction of these committees? And obviously there's still the economic development talked in there, the parks and recreation, but even emergency preparedness or safety, a good list, and same thing with Jenna and Joe's on the back there, of different ideas that we could really use these committees to do and at least give some direction going forward in the immediate future for those. I guess the biggest question is that we have this list, once again, is that appropriate for them, for staff, for a different type of committee? Those are things, I just review these. We don't need to go through them all right now. Like I say, I'm not looking for a specific outcome tonight. This is very educational and discussion for the council to come together. But a lot of good ideas in there. A lot of things we've already discussed before, and then there's new ideas in there as well. So one thing, I don't think it's in here, but through discussions just about, once again, that Parks and Recreation Committee, we had really talked about additional ideas beyond where they're currently as, is just really focusing, as Joe mentioned, about that recreation. And recreation can really expand to more than just your typical soccer league or things like that, but looking at events. Do we want to expand our types of events? Community education, doing something like quilting or guitar lessons. I mean, recreation is a very broad term. It's really just providing opportunities in the community to come together. A little bit different than a library would typically do, but similar. There are some crossover areas there. And that could be, if there was in the goals coming up, really a focus to do that, we could look at increasing some of those opportunities as well. Number 7, do the lineup goal? Yeah. The economic, there's for sure Parks and Recreation identified several areas. In Emergency Preparedness and Safety Committee, it was vague, I believe so, but I don't know. It wasn't really spelled out which ones, but I'm sure we could find a place for that, or in potential. And that is a question. I'm not asking for it today, but we will ask them, is this something we really want to start digging deeper in on these extra committees as well? Or are they just current ideas and we're not going to, I don't know, we'll get there. All right. Makeup of committees. This one I think is really, it's important for sure, but it's interesting to read through the different types. Some of the comments we have talked about, even with our current committees, once again, this is about just if there's no committee existent, what would we do? A lot of them have 5 voting. Seems like Kim had 5 voting. Not a lot of emergency preparedness, 5 voting from Kim, committee members from Marissa. Local citizens, Joe put in there, preferably some from within city limits. That was the question. You know, it seems like our committees a lot of times are from external. Now, in the EDC, maybe that makes sense because a lot of them don't live in, but they have their business here in town, or they have an economic interest, and we're looking for that. Once again, the purpose thus far was we want that advice and expertise for economic development and developers. With the parks, is that best just city limits, maybe close by? Do we have a fraction, like at least 75% have to live within city limits, and we can have a few outside because we would, you know, there's still, yes, our parks, people do visit them outside and they are part of our community as well. But what does that look like and why? And why do we allow people, what would be the approval process of why we let somebody for whatever reason? And that would be a question for the council of what would be the reason for that.
It came up, you know, over the last 2 years, and they looked at it probably right before our time pretty heavily. And there was good reasons both. I mean, I think yes, for like Parks and Rec, when it's taxpayers' dollars and people living within the city and you're coming up with a budget to spend money, if you're outside of city limits, spending the money to benefit you, but you're not paying into it, that's one thing. So I think having residents, but we'd have trouble getting enough to be a quorum or to be on a 7 or 9-person committee to get 5 or 6. And then all of a sudden, let's say 2 city members quit and now you've got 5 out of the city and 2 in city. And so I think it is a good question that needs to be addressed. Again, EDC could be a little different because of businesses within city limits. But
that's a good question though. On the other side, if the community's not seeing the value in the committee,
if you have 7 voting members and can't get 4 within city limits, is that committee by what, you know, you can't get people involved enough? You can't get 4 people interested enough to help?
right? Is there just not, and is that really a priority of the city at that point? I don't know. That would be my first question. Like, is there nobody interested in this? Because it seems like it's a value in the parks master plan and in the 50-year plan. I think there's identified obviously goals for that, but what is causing that? And I don't know. That would be do we just need to wait longer? Do we need to advertise better? Do we need to have better word of mouth? I wasn't there. I don't know, but that would be a very good thing to look into to figure that out. The committees don't make policy or rulings like council does. But Jeanette, do you want to speak up? What was that regarding specifically to?
Well, I think it was regarding, and my understanding, if the committee members are not within the city limits, I'm more for the fact that we should have a huge percentage of members that are within city and maybe give some up that either work or outside city limits, because they still have a vested interest. But somebody mentioned about, I think it was Mayor Joe that said something like they'll make decisions that will cost the taxpayer, but ultimately those committees are not making any policy changes that will affect their taxes. It really comes down to council.
Potentially, the council does. You're right. The council is the one who approves any policies, any laws within the city. Jeanette, great comment. Thank you. The one caveat of that is, you know, for example, a master plan. If they're putting together that master plan to submit for approval, and they put that together with a certain, I don't know, skew on their perception, if there's a certain benefit or something they particularly want, that maybe isn't in the community's best interest, that could be an issue that sometimes have come up in other committees. But yeah, they may not make the policy, but they do help advise to that. So it is important to just at least recognize that they have the ability to impact, even though they don't do the final ruling to that. I'm not against, and once again, I'm not against outside input. Like I say, just as long as there's a reason for that. And once again, when you're looking for experts, that's always a great reason why to bring somebody. We may not have the expert within our city limits, and if we have somebody who's great with park design or puts together, you know, events or recreation activities, and we just don't have that locally, let's bring that in as part of the committee
I
But
think
make
that's
su-
what we did. I think that ultimately that's why we didn't put a limit on in-city out because we understand, we maybe put a recommendation we prefer, or as I look through applications, I can deny if we have 6 outside of city limits and 1 in right now, I may wait to get one that's in. I mean, that's, but I think we didn't put that on there because we were happy to get really good candidates, whether they're in city, have some expert park use, you know, they do use our parks. They've been around the state, around the country, they've seen parks. It's hard to say no to their help when they have some good experiences.
Right. And then the question comes though, that, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, if we have a committee that's a standing committee and we keep doing different types of projects, do they still meet that same, is it just a regular person giving feedback? Are we really getting the community feedback? Is it no longer an expert advice? And is that, once again, is that the right avenue for them for whatever the task may be, for whatever the project may be?
I'm looking at maybe the most flexibility,
Right.
ability as to adapt if it is something that hey, we need in city, an ad hoc because we need some specific stuff, or
Right.
what gives us that flexibility is a group like we have not give us a ton of flexibility. And
It might be helpful. I don't know how many are familiar with the history of like the traffic safety committee, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. So when I first was the liaison a year ago, I asked Dave the first meeting, like if they ever had community members, because it's a staff, it's just staff, and then the liaison. He said they used to, but then they over the years or whatever, they would get bogged down in the individual meetings talking about exactly kind of what we're talking about. People would just they couldn't get anything done, and so they moved to the staff meeting. It'd be great to get community members input, but it's an example of a committee that we have that has moved to the staff, and I should add too, we do get feedback for that committee through the online complaint kind of form, I guess. So there's still, a version of community feedback for that. But if it's helpful, that's kind of the history of one.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways to get feedback from a bigger audience if we need to. And it just depends on what type of audience we're looking for. Sometimes, as you mentioned, we can get really bogged down by 1 or 2 people putting their stamp on something or really wanting to vocalize something when that's not really even the opinion of the community as a whole. It's just that person's maybe it's affecting them. I mean, most people get involved when something's affecting them. So that's where a lot of their feedback will typically come from in an upsets industry. But yeah, so once again, looking at anything, do we have the right makeup, or do we need to get that feedback another way? With Parks and Recreation, there's a lot of different ways, and we mentioned that earlier, of doing different types of outreach to really focus in and and that gives the ability to get different types depending on where it is in the city, or the different type of event really focused on. For example, another committee that's like that, in Woodburn, this was about 10, 12 years ago. I don't know all the details. I wasn't that invested, but I always remember this. I was looking at Parks and Recreation. Their recreation director was named Stu something, but they were really bragging about their recreation committee. It was a youth committee that they were just had so much pride of, but it was a staff-oriented committee, and they used that committee for the recreation programming to come up with new programming, and they always involved them, and they always reached out to find out what the youth of the community really wanted, and that's how they really developed that. And they touted it, and they got recognized for it nationally of getting that community involvement. But once again, it was very focused on the type of people they're trying to reach, which added to that flexibility, being able to take it out of just a set committee, but to be able to look at the specific situation. Yeah, so lots of different ways to go with that. We got 15 minutes, so I'll try to get through the rest of these. Then we'll go with, and maybe not use this whiteboard all day because I talk a lot. Do we have the bandwidth? Defer to city manager? Yes, we have the bandwidth needed to. So in general, just looking at that, more than anything, just double checking that we do at the time. It's always the concern with staff with a lot of the projects they already have and putting on new projects. That's some of the concern with committees. If we're not running them efficiently or properly, that they're putting in new work at a time that the staff is already bogged down, and then nothing ever happens. And that's another way that committees will fail, because there's nowhere to get that done if it's reliant on staff, compared to the committee being able to be actionable and just go out and do that regardless of the staff workload. So council liaisons role, different ideas on this one, something to look at as we come around to the new year when we're looking at these committees. In general, to be the go-between between the council and the committee, there have been some things mentioned about having even those liaisons as one of the chairs to help run those committees, to help keep them, as opposed to just being a silent or a third party, but actually, or an ex officio member, actually up there to help steer the committee and keep them on task, and to be able to better follow those rules of procedure, and to stay in line with kind of what the council's goals were. So it's more of a direct, was one of that was mentioned. Keep the committees on task. Either way, it could be as a chair member or as an ex officio member. They could do that. Conduit, help direct. And another thing that I think that has really mentioned a lot of these is just reporting. Report back to the council. Keeping the committees accountable helps them be actionable. Keeps them in line, lets the council know what's going on. Not that our committees are out of line, I'm just saying it helps the whole thing work more smoothly, that all people are in line with each other, and staying in the task and the direction that we're looking for, and keeping them with the council goals. Yeah. All right. 11. Is there enough work? Going back to question 6, there's a lot of good things mentioned in there, and that would be the things to look through these committees as you're thinking as the new year comes up. Obviously, we're coming with goal setting, so I want to leave that as part of our goal setting to see if there's specific direction the council does want to assign to any of the current committees or a new committee, or to reassign our committees. I think that's really a time to look, now that we've gone through a lot of these discussions, to think about this, go through this process and goal setting and say, okay, now what are we going to do with this? How's the best way? Once again, what is the best way to tackle the goals that we want? Is it through a committee? Is it through the staff? Is it through the community? Is it through town halls? Is it through neighborhood meetings, surveys? What are we trying to get? Is it feedback from the community? Is it making things happen? We need more people to make it happen. And do we need more staff? Like, all these things are all great questions. One of the things I'd mentioned about the recreation committee, if we went that route, and I'd mentioned about that open position, if I filled that with something like that, that would really help. That would have that staff person that can help them stay in line and help coordinate and do a lot of the action work, but also with them doing the action work on the other, because if you're doing events, we had an event committee in Sandfield as an example, where it's just the 4th of July. That was what they were a permanent committee, but it was ad hoc in the fact that that's all they focused on. They kind of branched out and did some Easter stuff too, to do some fundraising, but it was all around getting money for the 4th of July. And it started off as all voluntary committees. Then it started to go in that you couldn't get volunteers enough to do that every single year. And so we got a staff member. I came in and said, well, we need to have at least somebody to help keep consistency. So we got a staff member assigned to that. And that became their project. And the 4th of July committee is still there. They were the board that made all the decisions, but that staff member made everything run and reached out and did a lot of that legwork that they didn't have the experience for. She knew all the vendors and the different places. So it helped our 4th of July parade and budgeting. It just helped keep that all in line. And they ended up being more of an advisory committee. But the end result was, you're talking about efficiency. They went from having meetings all the time to where they had it working like a clockwork, where they only had 2 meetings each year compared to the 10 they had before. The expenses that they were doing, and all the volunteer and all the they're just doing so much. We were able to reformat and use some of that professional background to get the vendors come in and make their own money and do stuff, and only use volunteers in a limited manner that where we needed them. But we were able to expand other people to do the work that we were doing. Anyways, there's just a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Was that it wasn't a council committee that needed to go by public meeting rules and stuff?
Yeah, I'll defer. The way it operated was more of a staff committee meeting. I think it was formed by the council, and when I got there, nobody knew anything about how it really operated, which was interesting. They had bylaws, but the staff at the time didn't quite read them. So I went through that and read that. And so it was kind of more formed as a staff committee meeting or an event committee, and it was not like the committee meeting where let's have a meeting and let's all give feedback and input. It was very much an action oriented. Let's give the staff a direction of where to go. And so that's how it evolved eventually. I think the initial side was a council, but it just didn't, well, that's not how they ever fully operated. I don't think they quite followed that all the way, but that was before I was there. And, but no, it was very, that event would not happen without the committee. If it was just all staff, it would have not happened. So definitely a huge value to having those committees, especially with, I mean, the wonderful thing about committees is you have people in the community doing something they're passionate about. If you have someone passionate about something, your event, your project, anything like that is going to be that much better because they're going to put the time into it that nobody else is willing to do. And the people who are willing to do that, I always salute them. And I'm so grateful for the community members who are willing to do that. And just like the council, it's pretty much a volunteer job. So we appreciate all that you do as well. As I mentioned at the very end of this, Joe has some additional information and Jeanette put in for things that were outside of my specific questions or maybe related, but I couldn't get them to a direct question. So it's 6:50. Let's leave the last 10 minutes for any questions, comments, feedback, or direction of moving forward.
Next steps. One thing I was just thinking, is this something that we go through goal setting as we normally would, and then see if something comes from that that would say, oh, we've done this goal setting. Those are things we can develop a committee around, or that's an ad hoc, or do we just continue to gather information? I obviously don't think we need to make any big changes before goal setting.
Did you do any outreach to the committee chairs to let them know this discussion was happening?
Yes, update for all of you. I reached out to Mike, JJ, Christine, and Carl. Talked to them all.
Did you get any feedback or thoughts from them about how things have been or how they wish they would be?
Yeah, the feedback I got from them, once again, there was some frustration about the public meeting laws and how that was restrictive. Lack of direction. They would like to have more direction. And that's one of the areas that they did mention as well, because I was talking about action. We have the city has done the goal setting in January, but our budget starts in July. So they also were not putting any of their stuff in until July as well, which to me, I thought on a committee side is a little bit prohibitive because committees don't quite work the same on it. They're not working typically on a budget for the most part. There may be some budgetary things involved, and so maybe those things might have to wait. But there's also a way to, and maybe that's not the case, but that's how it was described to me that, hey, it took till July. We couldn't even really start on that. And, if that's the case, maybe even looking at that, how we can, if we have a direction for them, let's get that going more fluidly with them so they can work on stuff. A 6-month wait period can be pretty long for something like a committee. So I'm not saying that is what happened. That's just the feedback that was given. I wasn't here to verify either way on that. But other feedback, like say they'd like to be able to be more actionable on some of those, make things happen. They talked about maybe subcommittees. In the committees, the problem with subcommittees, feedback from other parts of those committees were that it's nice for those who are part of the subcommittee, but then the rest of the committee is left out and they want to, in general, these volunteer committees want to be involved, and that can make them feel not part of the discussion, which once again, those people part of them would say, well, this is making it hard for me to get action going, but it's at the expense of the rest of the committee unless they really just don't want to be part of that. But with public meeting laws, once again, if you have more than the majority or the quorum that wants to participate, how do you do that as a subcommittee without excluding some people? So that was feedback given. Other feedback, they had mentioned they're really grateful they're actually re-looking at this. They think it really needs, that was direct feedback. Hey, it'd be nice to have this sorted out. It'd really be good to thank you for doing that. And then there was some are concerned. They just gave feedback from the committee members. Some were concerned, like, why are we looking at this again? And is that a slap in our face or whatever? That's not the word they use, but kind of that feeling of, are we not appreciated or whatever? And that's not, and I had mentioned, that's obviously not the point of this. We're not, I told all of them the same thing. I said, we're not looking at specific committees right now. We're not analyzing your committee. We're not analyzing what you're doing. We're not looking at your directions right now. We're looking at committees as a whole. That's why we're not involving the committee chairs. And so they all understood when I talked to them.
Looking back at our resolution for Parks and Rec, it's established on resolution 1515, so it started in 2015. We have rescinded and passed new resolutions almost every other year. So it'd be interesting to see why, like, what did we change? We changed it in 2219 from 2017, which was probably because of the centennial. They probably did a new resolution then. So it'd be interesting to see that we've replaced and rescinded and changed that over the years. We were looking at doing that and keeping it the same and maybe say, oh, that's Parks and Recreation. Now let's focus on recreation more. Or do we need to change it and do it again? Or do we need to roll over with a different,
Right.
I'd go through those resolutions for each one and really look and see the purpose, and because I think they're doing what they're told to do based on the bylaws and the.
Right. I don't think anybody has deliberately, I don't think any current committee is, and that's not the point of these committees. It's the discussions is to really analyze our current committees yet. That's obviously in the future, but to come up with this collaborative council, since we have this newer council that wasn't here when these were first created. They may have been part of a committee when it was created, but not as the current decision makers. To have that direction, have that vision, so that we go through our goals, we can really best utilize these and have the right format for these committees. Yeah, but I definitely, my recommendation is to work through our council goals since it's so close, and then address this as that time comes to really dig into the types of committees, and at that point, probably go through the operating procedures at that time for whatever committees are there. And then I would also recommend probably doing it how Florence had it, where we have a general book that has those, because it's pretty consistent describing those. And then those resolutions could be very simple when we do an ad hoc committee or any permanent committee, where it's just describing the purpose of this committee. And then the rest of it follows through what the typical manual shows on those. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Session adjourned. In a few minutes.